is Up SharkNation. Welcome to another SharkPod here, live from Greystone Studios. Mark, as usual these days, is out there in Glenageary. How are you doing, Mark?
Good to be here, Luke.
Yeah, great. We've got our guest. Our shark for the week is David Scanlon, venture investment leader at the NDRC. How are you doing there, David?
Yeah, not too bad, guys. Good to be here from the north side of the city, broadcasting live from lovely Malahide.
I love Malahide. It's like a upside down world for Greystones. It's almost like the same, like about as far from the thing.
As far out, exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Love it out there. Beautiful place to be, especially this time of year. I always think Malahide feels a bit like kind of New England almost, kind of autumny. Do you like it, right?
Yeah.
So love that.
Tell you what, the water felt autumnal this morning. That's for sure.
Were you in the water?
Yeah, I was in for a swim this morning. It's good.
Wow. Was it wave? Because I was down the seafront myself in Greystones, and the waves were huge. There's loads of people playing in them and stuff like that. But what was it like out there? Was it the same?
Look, for someone who grew up, like I learned to swim in Lahinch, where sort of West Clare is where I'm originally from, and
Okay.
I think comparisons from the East Coast big swell to someone who grew up in Lahinch it's really not anything at all. No, there was I don't know, half a foot of chop on the beach this morning. It really wasn't anything to trouble you.
Okay, so not the west of Ireland Atlantic swells or anything like that. Okay, cool. So today we really wanted to have a chat with you because over the last, I don't know, what do you think, Mark? Over the last kind of 6 weeks, we've had a good few people on the podcast that have been involved with the NDRC in the accelerator program there. And to be honest, we didn't really know too much about it. We don't really know how accelerator programs work and stuff like that. Loads of our listeners are entrepreneurs, people who want to start businesses, salespeople, all that type of stuff. So I think it would be great to have a chat about how that type of system works. Kind of generally, definitely, have a chat about the NDRC and kind of the successes that have been there. Hey, Mark Baker, there was one thing that that I thought was funny that I was reading about the NDRC this morning. One of the founding or the people who started it was IADT, the place I went to college.
Okay.
And no one ever mentioned it there. And I was in I was in a business and entrepreneurship, but it never came up in 4 years. So, I mean, I'm going to get on to Connor Hegney about that. A quick shout out to Connor. I know he listens to this sometimes. He's running the program out there. But anyway, David, would you mind telling the people that are listening, maybe give them just like a quick kind of summary of what the NDRC does and how it can help entrepreneurs and people who are starting out?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Luke. So it can be quite confusing, right? It can be very confusing for an early stage entrepreneur to understand what the supports available to them are. And there has been phrases like business incubator, enterprise center, accelerator used interchangeably in the startup ecosystem here for many years. And it really can be quite interchangeable and people can get quite lost. So I suppose what we would see is, our mission is around, well, I suppose it was initially around a market failure, right? There is a problem with the volume of tech entrepreneurs who have developed the skills and validated their businesses enough to a point where they can go on and they can raise growth capital, what people would typically call seed funding. So the government had decided that this was an issue, that there wasn't this flow of deals coming through, but also there was this gap of skills. So there was a digital entrepreneurship skill gap. And they decided that they needed to do something about that. So, the NDRC's mission was born from that sort of initiative by the government to say, look, we need to do something in this space. The sector needs to be improved in some way. And that was the initial way that we were born. I mean, if you think about what we do as a group, we give a small amount of capital. So this is, direct financial support. And that has ranged over the years, but kind of typically in the sort of the 50k euro sort of space. We take a small bit of equity in the company in exchange for that. And then we bring a tremendous amount of human capital and experience to bear on an early stage startup who has not yet achieved product market fit and has not yet validated the market enough for a seed stage seed stage investor to come along and provide the growth capital. So there's loads of stuff in there probably to unpack, right? But typically what you've got is you've got an entrepreneur who will come to somebody like NDRC and say, I think I see a problem. I think I see a problem with some customers. They're struggling. And you're either coming at that because you've got some, really strong commercial background, or you've got some interesting technology, and you know that at some point in the future of that company, you're going to need to get access to venture investment, right? So that's like, going to a seed VC or whatever. You've had people like that on the podcast in the past. And what you need to show is that you have de-risked your business enough for an investor to be willing to put money into the business, but you also want to be able to de-risk it enough so that you've built up enough value so that you're not going to be completely fleeced by those investors. Now, accelerators aren't, there isn't, it's not compulsory. It's not a compulsory step in the growth of a scaling company. Lots of entrepreneurs who are smart people figure out the steps that they need to do to de-risk the business before they die so that they can go and that they can raise investment. What we say with an accelerator model is we just make that happen faster. We would identify the key risks. We will de-risk them as much as we can with the small amount of capital that we have in the short period of time, and be able to build up enough value and build up enough validation for an investor to punt and I suppose invest in at the seed stage. Or, and this happens quite frequently as well, we completely invalidate the business model. We go through by identifying the risks and say, this would be a killer risk if you don't de-risk it. And then we realize, well, actually, you can't de-risk this. This has now actually killed your opportunity. And then you get lots of other pathways after that. But it's a speeding up of that process. And I suppose for me, the biggest thing that you want an entrepreneur to have at the end of the process is confidence. It's confidence that they've done enough to genuinely validate the opportunity so that they can make a decision then, do I go and look for scale capital, or do I call it quits and go and get a job? So that's kind of what we do. Now, look, there's obviously loads more in there, but that's probably the bones of it.
I think that's a really good explanation there. So one of the biggest things I think that this might be addressing, like you said, is the gap between like idea and being something that you can actually invest in. For example, I have a friend who is, has an incredible idea for a piece of software, has the distribution kind of channel in mind that would most likely be a good fit for this. There's a target market there that isn't infinite, but it is quite big. But his problem right now is he's talking to companies in India about building some sort of very basic version of it, but it's still going to cost 20 grand because it's because of the technology that's needed to put that in place. So he doesn't know if it's like, he doesn't have a lot of experience doing this in the past, so he doesn't know how to de-risk this. He doesn't know, and what I'm encouraging him because I think it's a good idea, but I don't really have the background to do that. Do you like it, right? So
it's really interesting. I just to come in there, I mean, like, you've identified so many, like, there's so many entrepreneurs would come to an early stage accelerator in that sort of a scenario, and the problem is humans kind of suck at spotting the assumptions that they have about an idea, right? So he's going to have a whole bunch of biases and assumptions there, and I suppose what an accelerator does, and it's the people who work there, right? So it's the people who have the experience and the capability to say, look, you need some accountability here. You need to be able to stack your assumptions side by side and have somebody else with the discipline and the rigor to say, this one is clearly a bigger fundamental risk to your business. And what we need to do is design an experiment so that we can learn as much as we can before we take any steps to go forward. And that's going to, like, typically what you're going to find is, like, it's the bit of the opportunity, it's the bit of the business model that the entrepreneur is least comfortable in, because what entrepreneurs will tend to do is they'll tend to stay in the comfort zone, and they'll think about the features, they'll think about the distribution channel, but maybe they won't think about, that fundamental question, does anybody actually give a shit about what I'm trying to build here? and in a way that's meaningful and in a way that I can prove. So that's a huge part of what we would do in the accelerator is, okay, look, you validated something or you partially validated bits and pieces, but let's put all of the assumptions that you've got down on paper and side by side, look at them and say, which of these can kill me the quickest? And what can I do faster than anybody else to invalidate or validate whether or not this is actually a fatal risk? And I love it.
Yeah.
It is the most satisfying work to be involved in, because you get to be really creative and you get to be really involved and impactful with the founder, because you're coaching them through what is a very difficult time, because you're pushing them to go to a place and to say, Jesus, is my baby the ugliest thing in the world? I really have to ask questions about this baby. Does anybody want it? And that's not an easy place for people to be. So you get this lovely mix of, being creative, thinking about solutions, thinking about ways that you can learn with the entrepreneur, but then also bringing them through this, which is quite honestly a really vulnerable time for them. So yeah, sorry, I do enjoy talking about my work.
Sorry, Luke. Most of the companies are obviously going to be, they're all tech-based companies. What backgrounds do people have? Like, what's some of the backgrounds that some of the maybe successes or even people that completed the program? What kind of backgrounds do the individuals have, just out of interest?
Yes, good question. I'm probably more than half of the entrepreneurs that we've invested in have no technical skill set themselves. And that poses problems for sure. But I suppose the way I would look at it, and I suppose it's important to remember as well that every early stage investor and every investor at every point in the scale is going to have their own preferences and their own red flags. I'd be of the opinion that if you don't have a deep understanding of your customer or the industry that you're coming from, and you've got either some unfair competitive advantage coming from your commercial experience, it doesn't matter how much technology skills that you have, because you're not going to eventually win on the strength of your technology. In most cases, unless you're building something like fundamentally new in the technology stack, like a new way to deliver encryption over mobile or something. I have no idea, right? Or a new way of encoding video that makes it 10x better than anything else that somebody else is doing. And that those things happen, but they're less common. But generally, if you're thinking about a business model innovation, just a better way of doing something, you're not going to win just because your technology can do something that your competitors can't, because you're just competing on features at that point. And you can buy in the necessary technology skills to deliver really, really ugly versions of the product in the early stages. And I suppose, my thesis on it is, like, if you found a customer who is crazy, delusional is the word that I use with the problem, they don't care how bad the solution is, as long as it's mostly fine, it's mostly working. So I guess you can bring in the technology expertise, but you can't substitute in the commercial know-how and the deep understanding of the customer, right? It's that insights into the customer's experience that's missing. So yeah, I mean, look, we certainly see entrepreneurs from multiple backgrounds, but for me, a tech only team coming to me without any commercial understanding, that's like a solution looking for a problem to solve, and that definitely raises red flags.
Is there any like characteristics or skill sets that you look for, that accelerators look for in an entrepreneur or business?
Yeah, absolutely. For like when you go through that process, I think that the one truism that you've got when you're an early stage entrepreneur is that what you think your business is going to be doing and what it's going to look like in terms of the value it creates is probably wrong, right? You're going to have to live with change as you meet your customers and you think about the problem that they're experiencing, and you change your solution and you adapt and you deliver value to them in new ways, right? So a founder who comes to an early stage investor who is absolute in their belief of how something is going to be, is a massive red flag. Because they're probably so locked in on their own self-belief that they just can't see how brittle the assumptions that they're standing on are. So they're going to cope poorly when they go out to customers. And they're probably going to have like this reality distortion field, which, they'll go, because we'll say, hey, did you go and talk to customers? And they'll come back and say, yeah, absolutely. It was amazing. They told me that I was the most amazing founder in the world and I should just go and build the thing that I wanted to build anyway. And we're like, really? That's how that conversation went in your head? Because that's unlikely to ever actually happen. That's a pretty big claim to make. We'd need to see some pretty big evidence in favor of something like that actually happening. So that's a massive flag for me. It's like, if you cannot acknowledge as an entrepreneur that you're probably wrong at some point in the assumptions that you've got about how the business is going to be, and you're not demonstrating a growth mindset, right? So if you're just fixed mindset and you just absolutely believe it has to be a certain way, like that's a world of hurt, that's, and you see those founders, right? They're like, God, there's founders who are going around the place now 5 years after I first started working in the sort of the pre-seed space, and they're still banging the same drum, and they wonder why nobody believes them and nobody will invest in their business, and they haven't shifted at all. You're like, God, that's terrible. And we try to put people like that out of their misery, to be honest. It's like, really, you should just go and get a job, because this isn't going to happen.
I love that as well, because you can do something for years, or you're losing the kind of opportunity cost of working in maybe that same space in a company that's up and running, and you could be able to see an angle there that you don't see from where you're standing, from inside that industry or whatever. So by taking 4 years or whatever, like I said, banging the drum, you're kind of missing out there on you're not speeding up the process.
Not at all. You're not learning, right? Like, and that's the biggest thing for me. It's just like, what can we learn as fast as we possibly can that gives us an unfair advantage? And then you decide, well, is that actually any use? And that's a different kind of conversation. It's like, we've discovered something interesting here, and then we make a decision about whether or not that's relevant, and then you can decide what kind of business you can build on top of it. But it's an honest conversation, rather than just kind of like never wanting to shift and just waiting for, I don't know, the miracle to happen where somebody drops a chunk of cash on your lap.
It's interesting. So what would you say would be like the types of companies that you guys are looking to invest in or have helped in the past? Are they like really, really big thinkers? Is that the goal, to have 1,000 employees one day? Or do you guys kind of handle more niche businesses that can be really profitable, but not they're never going to be a Facebook or equivalent?
Yeah, so I mean, from this was the NDRC's perspective over the last couple of years has been, we're interested in building companies with the entrepreneurs that are going to be suitable to raise multiple rounds of venture investment, and would that a VC will look at as an opportunity to return their fund, right? We're like, that's the goal. We want to be able to build a company that a VC can exit 10x on, and absolutely scales to, well, not 1,000 employees, but tens, if not hundreds of millions of euros in revenue annually. That's the goal. And if that's not the ambition of the founder or the founding team, that's something that we would filter on pretty early. And this isn't a value judgment. This is absolutely not saying that there are businesses that will never take on venture capital and will do extraordinarily well. Whatever that means for the founder, and that could be one person doing extremely well for themselves for the next 20 years, or it could be somebody building a business that's 100, 200, 300 staff. We have a very specific focus, and as I said, it's not a value-based judgment, and it's just based on I suppose the mission of the fund, but also it's kind of aligned with the skill sets of the team. So our focus and our experience has been on building teams that are going to be attractive to venture capital to grow. So we the ambition piece of that is the important piece, and you mentioned this, like, is it the big vision of the entrepreneur? That's important as well, but it's the personal ambition. I remember working with a team. It was one of the accelerators that I ran in Oman, in the Middle East. And early in the program, we invalidated the idea that they had pitched with, right? So the three guys came in, pitched an idea, and within about a week, we had figured out with them that the idea was a complete disaster, right? It was going to go nowhere at all. And that was really good, right? That was really powerful. And then you kind of figure out, well, what do you want to do? So we kind of set the guys an ideation challenge for a couple of weeks. Like, what could their skill set and their expertise and their interests bring them to in terms of a problem? And the guys it was really interesting. They set an ambition threshold on the business, which was a private jet each at the end of, at exit.
It's very Middle Eastern thinking. I like it.
Yeah. It's a different kind of scale out there, I suppose. But so they would look at an opportunity, and they would, they'd run the numbers and they'd pump it into the Excel, and they'd come to the end of it and go, you know what, that's only going to buy us one private jet. We'd have to split it three ways, and that would be a disaster, So it was like a private jet each. That was the level of ambition that they had. And it was funny in one sense, but it was really methodical, and it was really rational. And the three of them were 100% aligned on that ambition. And it meant that they would very quickly move through ideas that were presented to them.
I love that idea. We were talking about this just the other day. I think it was a couple of days ago. We had somebody else on the podcast, Neil from New York, who had reached out to us, who found us on YouTube one day and kind of watched a lot of our videos. One of the few people that are watching on YouTube at any stage. But he had kind of a really great career on kind of Wall Street, that type of thing. But he's doing a startup now. He's got this product, and we'll talk about that on our podcast there. But he had this we asked him at the end kind of like, how much money is enough money? And he had the most compelling future in his mind, so clear for what the money's going to purchase for his family, that we could see why he was so excited about this product. Remember that, Mark? He was saying, like, I want my kind of great grandkids to be sitting in this mansion and having Thanksgiving dinner and have my picture on the wall and like kind of like raise a toast to me and all that type of stuff. And I'm like, this is
and then forget about him for a year, and then they do it every year.
Yeah,
generational wealth is how he described it.
And it was such a clear vision that I was saying, say if I was an employee of his or something, I'm like, yeah, it seems like something I can get behind, even if it seemed a long way off. But I like the jet stuff as well. So were you kind of doing, were you in Oman for a while, or what was there kind of type of thing that you're doing over there?
Yeah, so there was an opportunity came up for the for NDRC. We were introduced to this probably the sovereign wealth fund. So it's a funny place, Oman. It's run by the Sultan. Sultan Qaboos at the time. He passed away late last year. But it's a place where there is a lot of wealth. And they have this massive sovereign wealth fund, but they're massively overdependent on the sort of the natural resources industry, right? So natural gas is a big thing to them. And like many countries in the region, can see this like event horizon, right, coming at them in this cliff where nobody wants to buy natural gas anymore, and what do you do? So they were doing a lot to try and educate and diversify the economy down there, and we're trying to develop, not dissimilar to what the Irish government did like 15 years ago here. How can we build up this pool of talented entrepreneurs? And they had a seed fund, and they had brought in some international partners. They brought in 500 startups to do some of the seed activity, but they were really struggling pre-seed ecosystem piece was difficult for them. So we got introduced through Atlantic Bridge, and we engaged with them to run 3 of their programs down there. So it was an unusual one for us, because like one of the things that differentiates a program like NDRC, like our accelerator programs, is that, and when I say differentiates it from lots of the sort of like startup education activity that's out there. So there's a tremendous amount of courses that you can take and programs you can join and mentorship and all that kind of good stuff. And it's really important. The difference with an investing accelerator is that we have skin in the game as the investor. We have an interest in the business doing well that is separated from the entrepreneur learning something. So there's a fundamental change in the relationship, and it actually makes the relationship kind of complicated. But I might talk about that again. But for the Oman example, we didn't pick the teams, so we weren't involved in the sourcing activity. We had a little bit of influence in terms of, well, this is clearly a terrible idea, or this is clearly a good idea, but by and large, we were going in to do the acceleration and to do the development and the coaching bits and pieces like that. So so I was down there for 3 programs. So typically a program is about 3 months.
Okay.
And I kind of did that over the course of about a year and a half. And I suppose I moved down for, I think it was 10 weeks for the first program. So that was a continuous period. And then for the second 2 programs, I did 2 weeks there, 2 weeks here. So kind of over and back for about a year. So lots of flights, unfortunately. So that wasn't the most environmentally friendly period of my life.
Because I'm doing business for the first time this year in Dubai. I've got a partner there, and I'm selling to that region. And it's so interesting. I've gone across all different types of companies that I never really sold to before. I'm kind of finding my feet there to a certain extent. Just out of interest, with the types of companies that they were developing, were they quite similar in the way they were thinking about problems as the guys in NDRC, or were they coming at this from a completely different angle, where they, or was the business ideas kind of the same type of thing that they were doing? Was there much differences there? Or?
There were some differences, yeah. I mean, like there was some pieces of it where, you're kind of going, right, like this is quite clearly a clone of, pick any Silicon Valley company and you're the first to do it in country. And that is an absolutely valid business model, right? I mean, you can point to people like Paul Kenny, the Irish entrepreneur who was in Dubai, and he was the first to launch something that looked like a Groupon. So nobody had done anything like a Groupon when Paul launched Kabone in Dubai, and that's a great story. His experiences building up that. I think he had like 2 million users on it at the end, so it was a real success. So there's an approach in the region where it's just like copy something that has worked in San Francisco and see if it make it work in Dubai or in Riyadh or wherever it happens to be. And the plan there is you just get acquired, right? I mean, so Amazon have bought the local competitor out there that was doing some retail stuff. Uber have bought Careem, which is, again, it was just Uber for the Middle East. So there's a really valid pathway there for local entrepreneurs. And then there's the batshit crazy stuff where I would come in and I'd look at a business and go, you're out of your mind. What on earth is this business? And thinking myself like, super smug and superior, kind of going, you fool, this will never work. What are you even trying to do? And then you realize that the fundamentals of, in some ways how society works, in some ways how the local industry has been built and is structured and how the distribution works are just so very different from what turns out to be my very limited and very Western white male experience of looking at something. And I'm like, oh, right, okay, that's something I never knew. So it was wonderful because, I was getting this exposure to all of these new different ways of thinking, but it was also a really nice dose of reality that said, what you actually understand is super limited, and there are so many different ways and approaches to doing things that you just have to be learning. So it was lovely for me on a personal level to kind of go, you don't know shit, and these people have genuine insight into how something works in an area that you don't understand. I can give an example, right? So there was a company down there, and they were doing. They were called Telepay, and they had built this system where you could buy top-up vouchers for mobile phones in retail stores, right? So you'd buy five. I can't remember what the currency was then, but let's just call it dollars. $5 worth of credit for your mobile, and then they would transfer that to a digital wallet, and then you could use that digital wallet for online payments to buy shoes or whatever it happened to be. And I was like, guys, what on earth is this? Like, what are you doing? Why are you making people go through these ridiculous steps? Like, cash into a store, transfer it to a wallet, find the retailer. I was like, this is mental. And then they said, the reality of life in Oman is that I think at the time it was maybe 15% of online transactions went through cards and 85% was cash on delivery. And there was this fundamental societal distrust of using credit cards online. And the overheads for the retailers are nuts, right? Because they've got cash in transit and they've got returns, and it's just such a mess. You've got drivers, arguing about change on the doorstep because someone, said the price of the bag was different. It's just madness. So any small improvement there for the banks and the telcos, and that they can get involved in being part of that network, is a huge step forward. So it was actually a really, really smart play. And I would have looked at that, like if someone had pitched that to me in Dublin, I'd still be laughing about it now. Like, this is clearly stupid. So it's when you kind of get that local understanding of how an industry works or how an ecosystem works. It's that lovely light that goes on.
It's such a coincidence that you are talking about that, because I was actually, I was dealing with a business out there as well, and I had never. So there was an e-commerce business that was, and I was showing them HubSpot. HubSpot does marketing and sales, in a traditional Western sense, where we assume that all of their e-commerce payments will be online. It's just an assumption that we make.
Yeah.
So we were talking to these guys and they said something, whatever, 80-90% of our business is cash on demand. So we send our drivers out to the desert to get cash. And I was like, I can't, what? And how do you get this cash back to the headquarters? And they're like, oh yeah, we've got this whole thing where we've got partners who go out and collect the cash, they deposit it in there, wire transfer over. So we don't even know if we get the money for something like 30 days or how much of it's going to be paid. And I was like, oh my, I can't believe that this business exists. Like, and they thought it was strange that I was so surprised. They're like, what do you mean?
But you know what? Like those moments are so refreshing. I find, like when you just somebody shines a light on all these assumptions that you have, and you're like, wow, look how wrong I was.
It's crazy. It's like I said, it's good. It's all learning experience, and it's kind of fun as well. But okay, so it might be fun to do maybe like a playbook or something for those people who are listening, I think there's going to be a lot of people listening out there who are in the kind of gap between I've got a good idea, good industry know-how and stuff like that. How do you what's the steps to get investment in the end, in your opinion, would you say? What would be the steps involved?
Okay, so we're going to assume that this is like it's an idea in a business that is on a track to raise significant venture capital down the road, right? This isn't just you need a bit of seed funding to get you started. It's not like family and friends cash you're looking for, right? You're looking to validate something that is going to be venture capital friendly. For me, it comes down to what you're going to be able to compete on, right? You're not going to be able to compete with your technological competitors on their tech, right? Like if you think that your tech is going to beat Apple's engineers or IBM's engineers or Amazon's engineers at some point in the future, forget about it, right? You're almost certainly not going to be able to compete. Like they'll win. If you think you're going to be able to compete because you've got some, you're going to put ads on Google or ads on Instagram and you're going to outspend your competitors, forget it. You're going to lose there as well, right? So for me, it comes down to what's the only thing that you can get an unfair insight into, which is the customer behavior, right? And what I would be focused on if it was me at this point and I was looking to raise some funding is I would be looking to get a really narrow view of a customer and I narrow in like a very specific segment and cohort of customers and be able to show behavior that everybody else thinks is counterintuitive. That's the thing that I suppose that I'm, that makes my eyes light up when an entrepreneur comes to me and they describe a customer that I'm probably familiar with, right? So they can say, look, you probably can imagine a customer that looks like X, Y, Z, and then they do these things. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Everybody knows that that's what happens in that industry. And then an entrepreneur who says, yeah, but I did this test. And it turns out that there's this segment of that customers and they're doing this really strange thing because they have a problem that nobody else understands. And that's when an investor, I can recall multiple times when an entrepreneur pitches to like a panel of investors to, to get access to the NDRC. And that's the bit that everybody leans forward. It's like, oh, that's surprising. I never expected you to say that about that particular type of customer. And that's something that nobody else knows. And, does that mean that it's a business that you're going to scale? Not yet, but it's definitely a good place to start. It's a better place to start than coming in and telling me something obvious, like people are going to use smartphones more in the next couple of years, or video is going to become, the next big thing in digital communication. I'm like, I don't give a shit. But what's something super interesting and counterintuitive that you as an entrepreneur have discovered because you did a test? That's interesting. And the test can be anything, right? You think back to some of these big classic examples of tech entrepreneurs who tested in a really unusual way, and you look at the Dropbox example, you look at the Zappos example, and you get some signal that your confidence shows that there's a cohort of customers that need a solution that somebody else didn't know about. That's the very best place to start. And then there's loads of ways that you can figure out if you can build a scalable business on the back of that. Like, you make assumptions about your go-to-market, you make assumptions about the unit economics, and whether or not you can actually, extract some reasonably good value from that opportunity. But the very, very start of that is, I've got a very discrete segment of customers that I understand something about, and nobody else knows. And like I said, it could be anything. It could be a mailing list that people are signing up to, and the open rates are through the roof. Or it could be, it's a video, or it's this podcast. Who knows, guys?
Yeah.
It's just it's unusual, unexpected behavior, and then we figure out whether or not that we can monetize, as our American cousins would say.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, I really like that, the way of looking at that as we figure out some sort of unusual behavior that a cohort of customers are doing that, and we're like, why would they be doing that?
Yeah.
Like I worked in a startup in Canada for a couple of years, and it was payment software. And if you looked at, so we thought the payment software was one thing, but then our customers were kind of using it in a completely different way, and they were kind of like hacking other bits and pieces together to make it work, and maybe there was something, a business opportunity for either the startup I was in or somebody else to have a look at that and say, well, maybe there's a piece that I can build for them, because there's 50% of our customers are manipulating the product to make it suit. So is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. And I'll bring it back to an earlier point that I made, which is around the sort of the fixed mindset. If you're the entrepreneur who has a very specific idea of the technology that you want to build, you won't be able to see that opportunity, because you'll be like, I need you to buy this thing. Would you buy this if I built it? And they're like, yeah, but like, I'm doing this mad shit over here. You wouldn't believe how hard it is for me to solve this problem. An entrepreneur who has either a very fixed idea about what it is that they need to build to be successful, or even worse, has put their life savings into already building the tech, they're not going to be able to see the opportunity that the customer is talking about this other problem over here, because they've got this big heavy weight of the product in their head, and they'll miss that. And like, to me, that's a tragedy, right? I mean, I have very direct, example of this. I had an entrepreneur, super experienced guy, career in fin services, and he had put 400 fucking thousand euros into his technology product, and then he couldn't find a customer for it because the customers were telling him that they couldn't use the product the way he built it, but he hadn't gone out to talk to them beforehand, and like nothing, like, and they were talking about really interesting things that were like, millimeters adjacent to what he wanted to sell to them. And they were like, yeah, I know, but like, I've got this really interesting problem. And he's like, oh yeah, but I can't fix that with my solution. So would you buy the solution because you've got this problem? And they're like, no, that's not really how this is going to work. And that's a tragedy, right?
Jeez, the market can be very cruel. It's right.
It's not there to be your friend, Luke.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Wow, that's interesting. So was there any, just out of interest as well, like, was there any like companies that you guys were investing in that you guys thought this was going to be a world beater, and then for some reason it never lived up to its potential? I'm sure that might have happened a few times as well.
Oh God, yeah. Jesus, absolutely. I mean, like, and that's just natural, right? I mean, like, it's so risky at this stage, at the stage that NDRC invests in, right? So, like, it's not uncommon to be investing in just a slide deck. Like, that's it. It's the people and a slide deck, because they're curious. They've got some ideas. They've got a little bit of validation, but they definitely don't have a product, and they absolutely don't have revenue. So that's pretty risky. That's why at pre-seed, typically what you do is you invest in a cohort, because you just have to try and mitigate the risk somehow. So you tend to just like you put smaller amounts of capital and distribute it further.
It's interesting. Okay,
David, is there any that I know you probably can't be you can't be overly biased towards one in particular, but is there any exciting startups that have come out recently that that excite you right now?
So actually, I mean, like I kind of quick look back through your archives. You've picked out a couple of really interesting ones there. From our recent couple of cohorts. So you obviously had Danny on from Animus, and he's a superstar. We're all really excited about Danny. His team there is great. Michael, he wasn't. I don't think you had Michael on the podcast, but Danny and Michael and Claire Dillon, they're really superstars. They really get the space, and they're such great visionary thinkers. Probably too much if Danny's listening to this. Danny needs to turn down the vision sometimes. But there's a couple as well. There, I think you had Connor on from Connor Sheridan previously of Mad Egg. God, Connor was one of the most exciting and challenging entrepreneurs to work with. He really was. He was superb. He's got some mind on him. Actually, and he laughs now if he hears me say this. I couldn't ever go one-to-one with Connor. I always had to ring back up, because he'd be 15 steps ahead of you in a conversation, and you just needed time to kind of think about the next question to catch up with his thinking. So I'd always bring a colleague along so they could ask a question in the gap, because he's got such a mind. He's like a mercurial thinker. So I love the space that Connor is in, and he has just got such a great commercial understanding of the problem that he's fixing. So I think they're about to rebrand. Actually, I don't know if he talked about that when he was on the show with you guys. So it's not going to be called Squeeze anymore, which is a good thing. It's kind of a stupid name. There was another team as well, and I'm only I suppose focusing on the last 12 months because it's probably the ones that are freshest in my mind. But there was a great team on the Dublin program with us that started in March. Founder is a guy called Dave Carney, not the rugby player, but he has a product called Champion's Mind. I don't know if you guys have come across it.
No.
This is lovely. You guys should go check this out. Everybody should go check this out, right? So it focuses on this newfound interest, not even newfound, it's something that's been in the ether for a couple of years. It's the idea of mindfulness, mental strength conditioning that the likes of Headspace and Calm and lots of other players have been going after, and it's a hugely successful business. I mean, I personally find it quite an important part of my schedule is getting some meditative practice. But a lot of people are into this, right? But there's a cohort of customers for whom a gentle 10-minute, waves crashing on the beach, meditative breathing exercise isn't going to work. And that cohort of people is professional athletes, right? So if, there are people who are like, my mind game is the most important part of the game for me. And I can see that mindfulness and meditative practice is a really useful way for me to understand my own mental strengths and weaknesses. But, I can't do 10 minutes of gentle waves on the beach before I get onto the rugby pitch, right? Or go on and take to the basketball court because I'll be asleep, right? So what he has done is effectively taking the best of the approach of the Headspace and the Calm, that approach to meditative practice and that discipline of building up, into your routine. But then he's married that to, the peak performance coaching expertise. So he actually, and I maybe take a step back, right? So Dave Carney, serial tech entrepreneur, had built a previous business and then wanted to do something in the consumer space, identified that this was a problem, and then just went and found the highest level, American college peak performance sports psychologist coach he could find and said, I want to build a business with you. So he found this guy who had been peak performance coach for, I think it was the San Francisco Giants. Is that the baseball team in San Francisco?
Yes, baseball.
Whatever the baseball team. Yeah. So
Yeah.
he was the peak performance coach for the San Francisco Giants, right? And he was, leading sports psychologist in the University of Arizona. He had coached like something like 19, Olympic gold medal athletes and gymnasts and stuff like that, and said, I want your mind, I want your know-how and expertise, and I'm going to build effectively something that looks like a Calm or a Headspace for high performance athletes, either professional, semi-professional, or aspiring professional athletes. And it is just the most beautiful technical product I've seen in a long time. And it is doing unbelievably well. And it's interesting because lockdown and the pandemic has actually made this a crucial part of the toolkit for college coaches in the US, because they're trying to do something for their athletes who are stuck at home and training by themselves. And then they can just build this program of mental conditioning that is delivered by the Champions Mind app. It's absolutely brilliant, and I think he's going to do really well with it.
I think it sounds like it's really, really interesting. And again, with the pandemic, where you can't coach people in person as much, I guess. It's going to be even bigger. That's really interesting. I love that.
Try to get him on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you should. I can intro him in. He's a good guy.
It's a kind of a different approach to what we had been talking about, the way you're trying to find kind of strange behavior of potential customers. And it's kind of like going to find the person who's the best at something, and then saying, okay, you're not really, I've got the way to monetize this, or I've got the way to kind of get this to the most people, and kind of teaming up that way. So it's there's different approaches there.
There is, yeah. But I suppose, Dave could talk to Jim, and Jim could go, here's all the crazy stuff that sports coaches do with their athletes. It's bonkers the way that mental conditioning is applied in college, in the NCAA or whatever it is in the US. So Jim had the insight into the user behavior there, which is the sports coaches who are struggling to be able to, because they're usually what happens with these sports coaches is they're one chapter ahead of the team in psychology 101, right? And they're just doing their best to try and educate their athletes. So they're desperate to find a way that helps them scale that conditioning to their teams. So look, it still comes down to the insight into the user behavior. It was just this happy circumstance where Dave kind of thought this could be an interesting thing to do. What would be the first step? And the first step here is, can I find somebody who understands the space with me? So he's very methodical in his approach as well. So I still think it comes down to the fundamental. Do you understand what your customer is trying to do?
I'm excited now, Mark Baker. I want to get out there and figure something out here and get going. But time flies here. We've only got 10 minutes left. Usually, wow. David, we usually try to keep it to about an hour. But we also like to do kind of a lightning round at the end of the podcast, just to pick our guest's brain on a few items. And it's been really good because it gets us to compare how different people think about different subjects. Mark usually kind of takes over here. It's the lightning round. We haven't really nailed down a way of describe it, but I think that.
I have a question. Actually before we do the lightning round.
Yeah.
What's with the shark thing? Is this like why am I this week's shark, and why is this the SharkPod?
Here's the real reason, and it has nothing to do with when people thought it might be like a shark, as in like some National Geographic style podcast where going into shark science and stuff. Okay, so a couple of years ago, I started an ill-fated recruitment business. And it was called Shark Recruitment. Even at that time, the shark thing had nothing to do with recruitment or anything like that. Me and Mark, I can't really remember exactly what was happening there. We were looking at URLs, and shark.ie was open. So I bought shark.ie for like €2, and I'm like, there's got to be something we can do with this.
Good.
And I just thought, okay, well, it's a one-word URL. I'm a fan of Shark Week, all that type of stuff. Let's just get it, and we'll do something with it. We tried to do recruitment business. It didn't take off. So then we just kept on renewing it, and then we were going to start a podcast last Christmas. And I just said, we've got Shark.a. Why don't we call it the SharkPod? And Mark's like, that sounds like we're kind of piggybacking on the Shark Tank in America, the kind of shark in a suit type thing. But
so we built it around the URL essentially.
Eventually, yeah.
Keep moving forward, that kind of motto, you know.
And we really take
that's terrible.
There's actually lots of little sharks that are swimming around, but yeah, we've got at the beginning we were way too heavy on the shark puns. Do you know what I mean? I'm going to call it a shark's tail. That might have been a part of it. Really? Yeah.
Luke has a lot of ideas for new businesses based purely around puns. I don't know if that's something that you see much, David.
It's probably not something that I'd invest in off the top of my head. Like, it's like, I want to do this business. I have a great one, right? Okay, I can't believe I'm going to share this one because you love this, Luke, right? If pun businesses are your thing, I'm a bit of a fan now as well, right? So imagine a locksmith that's focused on the Dublin market, and what they do is they do unique house keys for your front door, right? Okay. So these are keys that are unlike anybody else's, and they're locks like anybody else's. And you would call the business Custom House Keys.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. It's absolutely terrible, and that's a really good, a good example of why no one would ever want to invest in a business based on a pun.
I think it's really good.
Another one, and we're not going to get to any of the questions. This one is better, right? So this is Middle Eastern fast food for fans of the A-Team. And you'd call it Pit of the Fool.
Pit of the Fool.
Pit of the Fool.
It's brilliant. I'm glad I'm not on this decision board for the NDRC. I'm like, what? And you sell pitters? Get in there. Get in. We'll figure out the details. That's what I'd be like. I don't know. I don't have too much off the top of my head now, but there's been a lot of puns that we're going through. But anyway, okay.
I can't believe you had them too at the ready so easily, David. I'm impressed.
Listen. They've been brewing for a long time. To tell you that, Mark. I'm just waiting for the Middle Eastern food market to take off in Dublin, and I'm there.
Yeah. It's like,
okay, right, I'll crack on with these. Right, nice and light at the start. What apps do you use the most on your phone?
What apps? So. We talked about this at the very start of the session. I swim, open sea swim year round. So a combination of the weather charts to check the sunrise because it's dark at the moment, and there's a great app called Tides Near Me, and it just gives you local tide times and local tide heights to time the swim, because there's nothing worse than like scrambling over cold rocks in the dark, I find, in October. That's not fun. So yeah, that's probably the one. So I'd use that just to kind of figure out the swim schedule for the week. So Tides Near Me, and then AccuWeather for the because AccuWeather does the sort of like daily sunrise and kind of give you a sense of the brightness in the sky.
Very good. What's your favorite social media and why?
Probably just Twitter at this stage, to be honest, and probably just because I've been on it for so long. So probably been tweeting for about 10 years. So there's a community there of people, that sort of like the people who I've been on Twitter and connected to a sort of like, a blogging community in Dublin since there were things called tweet-ups, and tweet-ups in Dublin in the sort of like the early noughties and mid noughties was literally just when everybody in Dublin who had a Twitter account met up in real life and talked to each other. And it was really strange because they had nothing in common other than that they were users of that social network. But that community is still there. So it's lovely to be part of that still. And look, Twitter is a horrible place for the vast majority of the human population, as far as I can see. But there is still I still have a core community that I would tap into. So yeah, that's probably why.
Cool. Nice. We probably know the answer to this one already. What's the best business idea you've never acted upon? It's Pit of the Fool, isn't it?
Everyone wears gold chains in there, and Everyone's not getting on no plane. Oh, that's good.
Right. So yeah. So it's either they're not getting on no plane. So yeah, it's either going to be Pit of the Fool, or you know what? Like no one has launched a decent, global dominating religion in many a century. So there's probably a gap in the market for that. You could get product market fit and go viral pretty quickly with a new religion. I think so. Yeah.
People are
There's
shouting out for a new religion. They're like,
yeah.
it's there's nothing going on. It's a big gap there. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go. Let's do it.
What time do you get up at in the morning, and what time do you go to sleep?
So if I'm swimming, I usually, so I've got 3 kids, so I tend to be out of the water and back so that we can have breakfast together before they go to school. So depends, probably 6:15 thereabouts in the water before 7, and then 10:30, 11, something like that. I'm lying about that last one. It's probably later. I'm trying to appear healthier than I am. So I definitely don't get enough sleep. Who the fuck gets enough sleep? So yeah, let's just say 10:30 because that's a reasonable answer.
And David, are you doing like this for training and health, or is there things that you compete in for the swimming, or is that something you've always done?
It's been both. So I would have been, one of those sort of 20 hours in the pool kids. Swimming before school from the age of 7 to 18. So I would have competed at national level and then kind of dropped that for a couple of years and then got back into the sea swimming. And I actually did a whole bunch of the Leinster Open water swims there for a couple of years. So I trained with Aer Lingus Masters and I swam with them last year as well. I did the Liffey last year, which was great fun.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah. What year is it? 2020? Yeah. So I did the 2019 Centenary Liffey, which was great. I really enjoyed that. So I'm not specifically training for anything at the moment, but I'd get in and train, I suppose just do my own training session, maybe 4 days a week.
It's amazing. Like I started swimming during lockdown, so I was looking for something to do. So I was doing training for the half Ironman with actually did it on the podcast. We had the coach come on and all that type of stuff. And so I didn't have too much experience with swimming. Like I could swim. I grew up in Dunleary, so we used to jump in quite a lot and then get out. That was our kind of swimming, but I never really swam. But I remember my first training session. I crawled onto the beach, coughing up seaweed, and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. But out of the 3 things: the cycling, the running, and the swimming. The swimming is something that I've kept up since we've done the event because it is so enjoyable to be in the water early in the morning or before work, or I don't know, there's something about it. It's a powerful experience,
I think for me, I mean, there's loads of benefits directly related to swimming. It's a wonderful exercise, but there's for me, the reason I actually got back into swimming properly rather than just the splashing every now and again is that in Malahide, and I'm sure this is replicated in many places around the country, there is a group that swam. And they still swim every Sunday at 12 o'clock, right? It's their church. And there's a group of maybe 20, 30 people who will be there on any given day. And it's such a wide-ranging group of people. It's phenomenal. And I would challenge anybody to come up with a community who's involved in a physical exercise that spans just so many demographics, right? From, men and women in their late 70s, kids, teenagers, old fellas like myself, and we're all there and really supportive of each other and just there because we want to be swimming together. And it's a wonderful thing. And I really can't think of many other activities where you're doing something good for your body, you're doing something that connects you in with the community, and it's so egalitarian. It costs nothing to jump in the sea, right? So you probably need at this time of the year, you probably need a nice warm coat afterwards, and a cup of tea. But it's a great leveler, jumping in the sea with somebody else. So
you're tempting me, lads.
I could talk for the rest of the day about sea swimming, guys. So you probably should shut this down.
I'm going to send you a picture later of me forcing Mark to get into the water here out there. So maybe next weekend.
Okay, here's one. How much money is enough money?
How much money is enough money? That's a great question, guys. I don't have an answer for that.
It's hard one.
I mean, like it's interesting, right? I mean, like, you know, I've never been a sort of like, you know, I need at least 2 personal private jets, you know, by the time I'm 40 or 50. I guess I've never thought about finances like that. I never had a number in my head that I felt, and this is I probably should have, right? You know, because I have a family and responsibilities now, but that was never something that motivated me. Was, you know, am I getting enough money for this? It's just like, I just don't want to have to think about, you know, whether or not I had enough money. That sounds unbelievably privileged, as I said that out loud. I don't have a good answer to that one. It's a good question.
Maybe that's the goal, to be privileged enough not to think about it.
Well, there you go. Yeah, absolutely. You know,
it seems to be to cover the basic needs. You know, Maslow's hierarchy. You know, so food, you know, safety, place to live, that kind of thing. But that can cost quite a lot of money. So it's interesting. People's answers are quite interesting, depending on where you live, of course.
It depends where you live and what your goals are, right? I mean, like I would, if I felt that I was not doing something, or I wasn't doing enough, so that I was putting limits on the relationships around me, right? So if I wasn't doing enough so that my kids weren't getting the maximum opportunity to grow and to learn and to have the experiences that they want to have, then I would feel that I didn't have enough money, right? So that for me, that's an easy target. Like, you know, am I enabling my kids, or am I limiting my kids? And you know, that I think that would be a driver for me. That would be something that would trigger me to do something different.
That's a good answer. Yeah. Okay. 2 more, right?
2 more.
Is it who you know, or is it what you know?
Who.
Interesting.
It's who. Yeah. Because, like, who has ever managed to do something meaningful entirely by themselves, no matter how much they understood about something, right? Like, you know, no matter how expert they were at doing something, you know, there's that terrible cliche, and I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, right? It's like, no one is an island. You know, that's valid. It's a cliche for a reason, because it applies, it's universal to the human experience. You know, I could have what I feel is the best idea to do something, but I'm going to need people to come with me to do it, right? And you have to interact with humans at some point, so you need to be able to reflect on how you interact with people. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to get anything done, you know, unless you're a sociopath. And, you know, that hasn't gone down well in history for sociopaths who thought that they were doing the right thing.
Well, he might become president of America. You never know.
Well,
we said we wouldn't get political.
Yeah.
Okay, last one. If you could advise somebody to learn one skill, what would it be?
Actually, this is going to sound very arsey, and you know, teenage me would have thought this was the most ridiculous answer to this question in the world. But I think self-awareness. You know, and it goes back to the point that I made at the very start about people who don't understand their assumptions or assumptions. So self-awareness being the power to be able to stop and reflect on what you've done yourself and go, oh yeah, I did that again. You know, that's a pattern that I fall into when I'm in that kind of a situation. And even if you just have the ability to stop and notice it, it doesn't mean it has to be something that drives change for you, but the ability to notice how you behave, the ability to notice what your triggers are, the ability to say, this is a destructive way of coping with something, that is an absolute superpower, I think. And it's, you know, it's something that I came to late. And, you know, I think I, you know, probably walked this earth for 30 plus years with my head up my arse, you know, not seeing my privilege and not seeing how lucky I had been to sort of, like, you know, float so far. So, you know, having that self-awareness, that ability to reflect is I think it's something that you see somebody else having it straight away. You're like, that is a person that knows themselves. That isn't a person who has an ability to understand why they're responding a certain way, and you can spot them really quickly. So I think, if anything, I would get people to think about that.
Great answer.
As well. So David, we've had a great time having a chat with you today. Learned loads about the kind of early stage venture startup stuff. I think a lot of people that are listening to this that have those ideas are better off for having heard this, which is great. That's kind of what the point is about the podcast a lot of the time. But we do have one very important question for you, and that is, would you prefer a shark t-shirt or a shark mug?
T-shirt, guys, and I'll wear it to the beach if because that's appropriate, right?
Absolutely
Oh,
appropriate.
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll sort that out after the pod. David,
Fantastic.
thank you very much for coming along and having a chat with us Saturday morning. It's been fabulous, and we'll talk very soon.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, David. Cheers.